The studio lights were still warm. The coffee was still hot. And just minutes ago, everything looked completely normal, until it wasn't. Hoda Kotb, a name that has lived inside millions of American living rooms for decades. A voice so warm it feels like a hug through a television screen. A smile so genuine that even on your worst Monday morning, she made you feel like the day was genuinely worth showing up for. But here's what most people don't know. Behind that radiant smile, behind those bright studio lights, behind every laugh and every tear she shared on live television, there was a woman carrying something so heavy, so quietly that even the people closest to her didn't fully see it coming. And then, one day, just like that, the seat was empty. No warning, no slow fade, no long goodbye. The woman who had been a fixture of morning television for over 2 decades was suddenly, shockingly, gone, and the questions started pouring in. What happened? Is she okay? What aren't they telling us? Today, we are pulling back the curtain, not to sensationalize, not to gossip, but because Hoda's story, the real one, the full one, the raw and honest one, is one of the most powerful stories you will ever hear. Stay with us, because what happened next changed everything. Before we talk about the moment everything changed, we need to go back, way back, because you cannot understand what Hoda Kotb lost without first understanding everything she built and everything she survived to get there. Hoda Kotb was born on August 9, 1964, in Norman, Oklahoma. Her parents were Egyptian immigrants, educated, warm, deeply devoted to their family. Her father was an economist, her mother a librarian. From the very beginning, Hoda existed between 2 worlds, American by birth, Egyptian by heart, shaped by a family that believed in hard work, education, and the quiet dignity of doing things right. She grew up moving, Virginia, Nigeria, and eventually back to the United States, a childhood defined by adaptability, by learning how to walk into rooms where she didn't know a single soul, and still find a way to belong. Those early years of upheaval, of constant newness, gave her something most people spend a lifetime trying to find: the ability to connect with absolutely anyone. She studied broadcast journalism at Virginia Tech and graduated in 1986 with a dream that felt enormous and a resume that was still blank. She started at small local stations, doing the work that nobody glamorizes: weekend shifts, late nights, stories that barely made the cut. She wasn't an overnight success. She was something rarer and far more admirable. Someone who kept going when going got hard. And hard it got. In 2006, at the height of what should have been a peak professional moment, Hoda received a diagnosis that stopped her completely in her tracks: breast cancer. She was 41 years old. She had just started finding her stride in a national spotlight, and suddenly she was sitting in a doctor's office hearing words no one is ever truly prepared to hear. She didn't run from it. She didn't hide it. She faced it: surgeries, treatment, the long and lonely road of recovery. And then she came back. She came back to work. She came back to life. And somehow, remarkably, she came back even more herself than she had ever been before. That resilience, that quiet, bone-deep refusal to be defined by her darkest chapter, is what set the stage for everything that came next. The Today Show, the co-anchor chair, the books, the interviews, the mornings that felt like shared sunrises with the entire country. But here's what the cameras never fully captured: the personal yearning that lived just beneath the surface, the longing for a family of her own, the fierce, beautiful joy she finally found when she became a mother through adoption. First to Haley Joy in 2017, then to Hope Catherine in 2019, 2 daughters, 2 miracles, 2 reasons she said she finally understood what it truly meant to feel complete. And then she fell in love, or rather, she had already fallen deeply, beautifully, with former New Orleans Saints quarterback Joel Schiffman. They got engaged. They built a life. And for a while, it looked like everything had finally, beautifully, clicked into place. So what happened? How does a woman at the very top of her world end up walking away from all of it? That's exactly what we're here to find out. There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a television studio when something truly unexpected happens. Not the silence of a technical error or a scheduled pause, but the silence of genuine shock. The kind that makes producers freeze in the control room and co-hosts glance sideways for just a fraction of a second before pulling their professional faces carefully back into place. That silence arrived on the Today Show set in a way no one had fully anticipated. January 6, 2023. Hoda Kotb returned to the Today Show after taking time off to care for her youngest daughter, Hope, who had been seriously ill. She came back looking composed, warm, professional, the Hoda that everyone recognized and loved. But those who knew her well, those who had sat beside her through thousands of mornings, quietly noticed that something in her eyes had shifted. Not broken, not defeated, just different, like a woman who had stood at the edge of something terrifying and come back, knowing things she simply hadn't known before. Because here's what happened in private, away from the cameras, away from the studio warm-up and the sponsored segments and the cheerful music cues. Hoda's daughter Hope had been gravely ill, a heart condition, the kind of illness that doesn't announce itself with warning labels. It arrives fast and hard and strips everything else in your life down to a single, burning point of focus. And for Hoda, that focus became total and absolute. Her child. What does it do to a person, to a mother, to sit beside her sick child while the world still expects her to show up on national television and talk about celebrity gossip and holiday recipes? What does it do to a woman who has already survived cancer, already rebuilt herself completely from the ground up, to face the very real possibility of losing someone she loves more than her own life? Those questions don't have easy answers, but they reframe everything that came after. When Hoda came back to the air in early 2023, she was still technically the same person millions had grown to love and trust. She still laughed at the right moments, still asked the warm, incisive questions that made her interviews feel like honest conversations between old friends, still brought that particular, irreplaceable quality of presence, the sense that she was genuinely there, genuinely listening, that had made her one of the most trusted faces in all of morning television. But the clock was ticking in a way that most viewers simply couldn't see. Behind the scenes, Hoda was making quiet calculations, the kind of math that has nothing to do with ratings or contracts or industry optics, and everything to do with the most fundamental question a human being can honestly ask themselves. What matters most? What do I actually want the rest of my life to look like? She had given 26 years to NBC, 26 years of early call times and live television, and the relentless, grinding pace of keeping a national morning show fresh and relevant every single day. 26 years of being, in many ways, more present for the American public than she could ever be for herself. And her daughters, Haley Joy and Hope Catherine, were growing up, fast, the way children always do when you're not watching closely enough. The way children do when you're sitting in a studio instead of sitting on the bedroom floor, listening to the particular and unrepeatable things they say when the day winds down, and they finally feel safe. Something was becoming undeniably clear, and Hoda, to her immense credit, was brave enough to let herself see it. The decision forming in her heart was not impulsive. It was not born of crisis or despair. It was born of hard-won clarity. The kind that only comes after you have sat with the most frightening questions, long enough to finally hear the honest answers. On January 10, 2024, Hoda Kotb made an announcement that stopped the morning television world completely in its tracks. She told her co-host Savannah Guthrie, live on air, that she would be leaving the Today Show. Not immediately, but by the end of the year. She was stepping back. She was choosing her daughters. She was, finally and fully, choosing herself. The reaction was immediate and enormous. Social media flooded with messages of love, of shock, of heartbreak from viewers who had grown up watching her, who had cried alongside her through the years, who had felt, in that strange and deeply sincere way that parasocial relationships can allow, that she was a friend, a constant, a reassuring presence in an unpredictable world. But here is what many of those messages got wrong. They framed her departure as a loss, as something sad, as something that simply happened to her. What they missed, what the surface reading always misses, is that this was not a loss at all. This was a choice, one of the bravest and most deliberate choices a woman in her position could possibly make. Because walking away from that kind of platform, that kind of income, that kind of cultural visibility when you are still at the very top is genuinely terrifying. The ego resists it, the industry punishes it, and the world, well-meaning as it so often is, doesn't always know how to celebrate a woman choosing quiet over spotlight. But Hoda already knew something the world was still slowly learning. She had spent years carefully building a version of success that looked extraordinary from the outside and felt, increasingly, like a beautiful cage from the inside. Not because the work wasn't meaningful, it truly was. Not because the relationships weren't real, they absolutely were. But because there was another life calling to her. A slower one, a more present one that simply couldn't coexist with a 3:30 a.m. alarm and a life lived almost entirely on camera. There's a particular kind of courage that women of a certain generation were simply never raised to name. It is the courage to stop, to say clearly, I have done enough of this particular thing. I have given generously and honestly to this chapter, and now I am turning the page. Hoda Kotb turned the page. But let's be honest about what lived underneath that decision, because this is precisely where the real story lives. The hidden truth that the news cycle completely glossed over in its rush to find the very next headline, the relationship with Joel Schiffman, the man she had been engaged to, the father figure her daughters had known and loved, had quietly ended in 2022. It didn't make enormous headlines at the time. Hoda addressed it briefly and with grace, the way she addresses most hard things, directly, warmly, without excessive drama. But the end of that relationship meant something deeply significant. It meant that the family she had so carefully constructed, the life she had so intentionally built alongside her professional one, had shifted in a fundamental and irreversible way. She was a single mother, a working single mother with a sick child, a demanding career, an audience of millions, and a heart that was quietly, but persistently asking her to reconsider absolutely everything. That is not weakness. That is not failure. That is a woman standing at the intersection of everything she was told to want and everything she actually needs, trying to find her honest way through with grace. And she did. Hoda Kotb did what so many people only ever talk about doing. She listened to the quiet voice. She trusted it completely. And then she acted. Her final day on the Today Show was January 10, 2025, exactly 1 year to the day after she had announced her departure. And true to her nature, she made it achingly, beautifully unforgettable. The set was covered in flowers sent by viewers from across the country. Her daughters were there, Haley Joy with her wide, bright eyes and her mother's same radiant energy, Hope Catherine smaller and quieter, but present in the way that mattered most of all. Co-anchors, crew members, producers, the people who had shared thousands of mornings with her, all gathered in that studio that had been her second home for so many years. And Hoda cried. Of course she cried. She always cried, and it was one of the things people genuinely loved most about her. Her tears were never performed, never calculated for emotional effect. They came because she felt things fully and simply refused to pretend otherwise in a media landscape that too often rewards detachment and quietly punishes sincerity. She spoke about gratitude. She spoke about her team. She spoke about the viewers, about the letters and the emails and the stories people had shared with her across the years. The woman who said watching Hoda helped her get through chemotherapy. The teenager who said a segment on self-acceptance completely changed how she looked at herself in the mirror. The grieving father who said that for just 1 hour every single morning, the Today Show made him feel measurably less alone. That is a legacy. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, absolutely everything. But what Hoda didn't say on air, what she has only hinted at carefully in interviews, between the lines of her public statements, is how deeply the silence of the mornings after would cost her. The identity woven into those early wake-ups, those live segments, that relentless and unforgiving pace. When it stops, the silence isn't simply quiet. It becomes loud with everything you've been far too busy to allow yourself to feel. The weeks following her departure from the Today Show were, by her own careful and honest admission, a period of profound adjustment. She was, for the first time in decades, not obligated to be anywhere at 3:30 in the morning. not obligated to perform a cheerfulness she didn't feel, not obligated to carefully manage her grief, her joy, her full human complexity. For the comfort and entertainment of a viewing audience, she was just a woman, a mother, a person, figuring out what chapter 2 genuinely looks like. And this, perhaps, is precisely where Hoda Kotb's story becomes most universally, deeply relevant, because most of us will never host a national morning show or walk away from a career that has defined us for over 2 decades. But most of us will, at some honest point in our lives, face a version of that same crossroads, the moment when who we've been and who we're becoming stand on opposite sides of a single decision, and we have no choice but to choose. Hoda chose presence over performance. She chose her children over her career, not because careers don't matter, but because these particular children, at this particular irreplaceable moment, needed more of their mother than any television schedule could ever allow. She has since been seen at school pickup, at the park, at grocery stores, simply living, visibly, joyfully, without the polished armor of celebrity that can make even the most authentic people feel slightly, perpetually out of reach. People who have encountered her in those ordinary moments consistently say the same thing. She was warm. She was present. She seemed, genuinely and unmistakably, like herself. That is not nothing. In a world that so often and so confidently mistakes exhaustion for ambition and busyness for meaning, that is absolutely everything. But let's not romanticize the transition to cleanly or to quickly, because the full, honest truth is that reinvention is hard, even when you choose it deliberately, even when every single part of you knows without question that it's right. Hoda Kotb built her identity entirely in the public eye. She built it across decades of showing up, of being seen, of mattering to people in a very specific and deeply visible way. That kind of identity doesn't dissolve neatly the moment you hand in your badge and walk out of the studio for the very last time. It lingers. It asks uncomfortable questions. It whispers at 3:30 in the morning, even on the mornings when the alarm is no longer set. Who are you when you're no longer Hoda Kotb, Today Show co-anchor? The answer to that question is not simple, and the honest process of discovering it, of sitting with the real discomfort of no longer being exactly who you were trained and celebrated for being, is something Hoda has spoken about with her trademark, disarming honesty. She has admitted the adjustment is genuinely real, that there are mornings when the muscle memory of decades of morning television makes the stillness feel profoundly strange. That purpose, once so clearly and visibly defined, has to be found again in a completely different shape. But here is precisely what distinguishes Hoda from so many people in the middle of that kind of personal reckoning. She is simply not afraid of the process. She has been through far harder things. She has sat in a doctor's office at 41 and heard the word cancer. She has sat beside a sick child in a hospital room and bargained with every belief she holds about the universe. She has ended a long relationship, rebuilt her expectations of partnership from scratch, and chosen to love her life anyway. A quiet morning is not going to break her. It is going to reveal her. What does the next chapter of Hoda Kotb's life actually look like? That is the question everyone is genuinely asking. And the most honest answer is, we don't fully know yet. And that, perhaps, is entirely the point. She has spoken carefully about future projects, writing, perhaps, advocacy work centered on the causes she cares about most deeply: breast cancer awareness, adoption, children's health and well-being. There's a compelling version of her future that looks like a second act, with just as much meaningful impact as the first, only quieter, more intentional, built thoughtfully on very different priorities. She has also spoken openly about love, about not closing the door on it, about genuinely believing that companionship and real partnership are still possible, and still deeply worth wanting. That is a particular kind of hope that doesn't come easily to someone who has already rebuilt themselves multiple times over. It has earned hope, the kind that has looked at loss with clear and unflinching eyes and decided, anyway, to remain open.